morning, everybody. Welcome to Soapbox Slam, where I get on my soapbox and I just slam things that I see going on. Last night I was scrolling. I'll probably do a couple posts today because last night I was scrolling and I came across another Candice Owen post. I've actually come across quite a few of her recent posts, and I want to comment on Candice Owen. Now, I'm not going to spend my entire production of Soapbox Slam to be contrary to Candice Owen or Ben Shapiro or Matt Walsh, but I do think that they are social commentators, and I wouldn't be prudent if I didn't acknowledge their positions, statements, and offer a contrary position. And I don't even know how contrary all of my positions are in comparison to theirs. The difference that I believe between my opinion and theirs opinion is, in my opinion, I allow for room for differences. I allow room for the existence of many different types of people and many different types of existence. And those people do not allow for that kind of truth in humanity. And that is where they are flawed. Where they are flawed is they feel a need to condemn, insult, degrade, and diminish anybody who doesn't have their exact opinion. So I'm on my soapbox this morning to talk about Candice Owens' post. She's made two posts that I want to respond to. I'll do a separate post for the other one. But this particular post that I'm interested in responding to has particularly to do with her comments on woke feminism and feminism in society. And while I do think that there are some very valid truths in the idea of what feminism has done to society and feminism has done to gender roles, I don't push the envelope as far as they do, and I find their opinions to be a little more extreme than what my position would be. And I actually happen to be more chauvinistic and some might identify my perspectives or views as toxic masculinity, and I would embrace that if it was as simple as if toxic masculinity was something more simple as pro-man, and so because I'm more pro-man on things than man's man or whatever else, then that would make me toxic. I think that there's a positive element to toxic masculinity and there's a negative element to toxic masculinity. And I think the negative element of toxic masculinity is that in a patriarchal society, masculinity is toxic in a negative tone when man abuses power. However, contrary to that, I believe in a patriarchal society when man does not abuse his power, but with his power, he empowers woman and he empowers children and he empowers the people around him. Well, then I think that a patriarchal society and masculinity, whether other people define it as toxic or not, is a beautiful thing. I like being a man. I like masculine roles. I like the identity of masculinity. So, for me, I think that someone like, whoever this Tate guy is, I forget his first name. There are a lot of things about him that I like. I do think he embraces a little more negative masculinity than I think ought to be tolerated. Because I think he takes masculinity's power and the role that man has in a lead role, he takes it to a negative perspective And that's what makes it toxic, and that's what gives it a bad name. But this soapbox isn't to really talk about patriarchal society. It's actually to talk about the feminism and feminists and what it's done to American society. And Candice Owen embraces, and I do not condemn her for this, and so does Matt Walsh, and then there's, you know, Megyn Kelly's perspective, where, you know, there are two people, those are two groups on the right that are contrary, right? Megyn Kelly embraces the idea of women in the workforce, being the superwoman, right? The supermom, this term that was used in the 80s and 90s, where a woman can do everything. She can work and cook and clean and take care of the home and everything else. Like, she's this superwoman. This is a term that was used in the 80s and 90s to define the new role of women when women were entering the workforce and women were more prevalent in society. You see, because this idea of women and women's role in society has adjusted and changed pretty much since the 80s. Now, they fought for rights in the 60s and 70s and, you know, things like that, you know, equal rights and these sort of things where women were entering the workforce, and more rights and everything else. But I've stated this before, that a part of the issue with women's rights and white women and women going into the workforce and the so-called deterioration of the nuclear family has way more to do with man's abuse of power and what man was doing to woman. Man was failing as a man. They were failing because they were abusing women. And I don't necessarily mean physical abuse, while that did occur, and more ways than it should have. But I'm talking about the mental abuse, the emotional abuse, these other forms of abuse and control that man had. And in those, and in that segment, and I see it in Muslim societies, and it's not prevalent. They're and even in Christian societies. So in the Abrahamic religions, in Jewish societies, there's this absolute control over man, and men with absolute power corrupts them absolutely, and they abuse their power, and they're not real good men because they have too much power. They were manipulating and deceptive and did not empower their women. They had all the power, and during these times of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, man abused his power and did not empower women, which is a failure on man's part. Those decades, the idea of toxic masculinity was well established because there was too much power in man's hand, and deterioration of man's role and man's responsibility to empower his wife, empower a woman, and empower everything around him. He failed. Now, whether it was because he did not have a religion or poor upbringing or whatever the case may be, we saw in society man's failure to empower the people around him. Instead, man, and it's still prevalent today, man, and we say man, all men, black, white, whatever, machismo, Latino, whatever, man has used his power to control and disempower the people around him. And that's where toxic masculinity and the failure of manhood lies. Now, back into, I really want to focus on the debate between the far right, where, you know, Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro and Candice Owen believe in a system where a woman stays home and takes care of her children and serves her husband and you know, is subservient and everything else. Now, we hear these words, right? Subservient and everything else, and we automatically get defensive to the idea or concept of what does it mean to be subservient or to serve, a woman's role to serve her man. And, you know, without everyone having their panties in a bunch and being so hypersensitive to the words that we're using. Words have meaning, and yes, I don't want to play a semantics game, but for all intents and purposes, a woman's role to serve her man. And Candice Owen embraces this, and she supports men who who adopt this this philosophy, and she's more contrary to a Megyn Kelly perspective, where, like I said, Megyn Kelly is like, I am a woman, I'm going to work, and I'm going to take care of my home, and my partner is going to pick up the slack where I can't do it all, if I can't do it all. And that's, you know, the Megyn Kelly perspective on the right wing. Where you get this leftist perspective is that absolutely a woman doesn't need a man, and a woman can do anything a man can do, and everything else. Well, you know, I don't agree with an extreme leftist perspective. I do believe I might have toxic masculinity. I think I am pro-man, and because I am a man. And, you know, I'm not pro-man, but yet anti-woman. I'm not anti-woman at all. I'm very much in support of women's rights, women's choices to choose what they do with their body, and everything else. Because while I want to be the leader of my household and the leader as a provider and everything else, have the say of how our household is run and everything else. I want those responsibilities. That's exactly what I believe in. I still want to empower my woman. If I'm going to choose to be with a woman, I want to allow my woman to make her own choices for what best suits her. The problem I have, and this is what I'm on my soapbox about, and where I think Candice, Owen, Megyn Kelly, Ben Shapiro, and Matt Walsh, the problem I have with them and their failure is they are doing the exact same thing that the left is doing. They are trying to put their expectations of what society should be like onto everybody else. That is wrong. That is wrong. That is not humanistic. That is not concerned with the collective. That is only concerned with their own values placed upon everybody else. And I don't agree with that. I think that is wrong. It's not their place. You know, Megyn Kelly said, quit being judged and da-da-da. But the hypocrisy in Megyn Kelly is that, oh, because Matt Walsh is contrary to her beliefs, she wants to combat it. But let a leftist or someone more moderate or somebody who doesn't agree with her perspective challenge her thoughts, and she does exactly what they do, and that's dismiss, denigrate, and put down an opinion that's different than hers. So between all of these people, none of them expound ideas that are inclusive or expound ideas that accept people for their differences. There are lots of reasons why a woman may be more inclined to not be a housewife, or to not want to take the role as a superwoman and still serve her husband and work. There are lots of ways that societies, civilizations, and these things have been made up. That is why we actually have concepts of matriarch and patriarch. There are several societies, tribal, historically, whatever case you want to make it, where matriarchy is the key to their society. And women play the most important role in the decisions and everything else. And I don't know what families all Matt Walsh and all these people come from and everything else. But I would suggest that if you, what is the old expression, if you want to be married for the rest of your life, you don't make a pretty woman your wife. That was one thing. But the other thing I was going to say is, if you want to be married for the rest of your life, let your woman run the household. And what I have seen in my immediate vicinities and vicinities in society and the public around, while a man looks like he's up front, the leader, right? Like, he looks like that. Secretly, it's been women who have been running everything all the time, right? I mean, everywhere I look in history, monarchies, all of these other things, you know, they have all these expressions. A man can't go anywhere without a woman by his side, or, you know, a man will not be successful without a woman by his side. Why do you think that is? Because she maximizes a man. Well, the truth is, not only does she these are very generalized terms, but the concept and the stereotype of her maximizing a man isn't the fact that she's a pretty trophy standing by her man, and so he's allowed to do work. It's the fact that she is also doing background work among women and everything else that prop up her husband's position or her man's position, right? It's a very complex dynamic. But the truth of the matter is, even in a patriarchal society, I have come to find that women in the background have been doing so much more, and men have gotten credit for it. So whether it's a patriarch society or a matriarch society, the role of a woman in society is critical. And that is what I think these conservative perspectives lack and acknowledge. There are lots of reasons why a woman would not fit into a patriarchal society. There's a lot of reasons. And the fact that you have the expectation of that does not account for the variables that would influence a woman's desire to not ascribe to a patriarch society, or a woman's desire to work in society, or be a supermom, or be of a perspective that they don't want a man around, or whatever else. Now, I personally don't necessarily agree with the concept of a woman operating in life without a man involved. I don't agree with that. I don't agree with men operating in society without women along. I don't want a society that's completely lesbian, and I don't want a society that is completely homosexual. However, having said that, I do want societies with lesbians and homosexuals, because both of them are fucking sexy as hell. The homosexuals and the lesbians are sexy ass people, and they contribute in their own groups as all women and groups as all men, contribute to the existence of society and make things better. We need it. Whether you want to acknowledge that as an ultra-conservative or not, we need the integration and the segregation of genders. We need it. And we need women to play different roles in society. And your inability to acknowledge that, accept that, facilitate that, and try to create better boundaries for those roles, because we get into a situation where we ostracize, like what Ben Shapiro is doing, like what Candice Owens is doing, like what Megyn Kelly is doing, and like what Matt Walsh is doing. We get into these positions where we ostracize and diminish and degrade people for having different variations of human existence, and we make them feel other than. And so they respond to that by lashing out even harder. It becomes a larger resistance. It's like when you try to discipline your child, or if you tell your daughter or something like that, no, you can't date that guy, that's the first thing you're gonna do, go out and date that guy, right? When you get more stringent and dismissive and the differences in people's human existence, because it's natural human behavior, without creating new boundaries and new parameters under which to work out of, then you get into the complete opposition and contrary combativeness. And that is what is tearing people apart. The trick is to recognize the humanity in all of us, whatever our situations are, and try to come to a more common desire or goal for society. And a more common goal for society is not for other people to adopt your role. It's not for you to insist that other people are wrong and that your position is right and they should come to your table. No. King Arthur, whether he's a real myth, whatever, had a round table. The reason it was round is because there was no head and that everyone was equal around the table. There's a reason in the philosophy of the round table. It's that everyone is equal at the table and they come there. And Candice and all these other people do not want a round table. And a round table does not mean you still diminish a patriarch society, or it does not mean that you diminish a matriarch society, whichever it is. what a round table does is it puts everyone at the table to say, okay, wait, what can we agree on? And all these things that we agree on, let's create those as the parameters so that society can exist and feel good about themselves, but still adhere to the parameters of the round table. So that being, and I'm going to wrap this up, we would all agree that, you know what, a two-parent home is better than a single-parent home. And you know what, I want to be a single parent, and I would still agree that a two-parent home is way better than a single-parent home. Absolutely. So does that mean, so let's create that parameter and say, let's encourage society, no matter who they are, man or woman, if they want to have a child. We don't want to stop people from wanting to have children. We don't want to condemn them for that. So let's encourage and incentivize them to try to make two-parent homes, but let's not condemn them for being single parents, right? Because the beauty is to be a parent and to raise a child, probably, you know, to raise a child in better circumstances than you were raised, right? So we can come to the table and say, okay, that's the parameter. We encourage two-parent homes. But the give and take and the negotiation is, okay, while Candice, Owen, Megyn Kelly, Ben Shapiro, and Matt Walsh think that two-parent home has to look like a man and a woman and a nuclear, coming to the table is saying, you know what? I'm not going to force people to be nuclear and completely heterosexual. I'm going to acknowledge and accept that two-parent home is way better than a single-parent home. So whether it's two men or two women, I would concede that two-parent home is better than a single-parent home. There's the compromise, right? Now, having said that, I have a position that no means and sounds different from a man than it does for a woman. So while I do accept and encourage and support the idea of two-parent homes, I still feel like if it's two lesbians, a man needs to be involved a lot so that that child hears no from a man as well as hearing no from a woman, because it means differently. It's received differently. And every child deserves to hear that from both a man and a woman, right? So yes, a two-parent home is better than a single-parent home, but I still would concede that however the dynamic works, and there are many ways to make the dynamic work, a child raised by hearing no from a man and a woman, whether it's two women as the primary parents and two men as the primary parents, it's still imperative that that child hear no from a man and a woman, right? Now that's the left conceding to the right's perspective that no sounds different from a man than it does from a woman. And every child needs to hear no from a man and a woman, right? So when I say come to the table, these are the things that we ought to be coming to the table about. And instead of condemning opposition or being different, being hetero or being homo, and trying to force people into tribes, we need to acknowledge and accept that everything that's happened in human societies is a reflection of human behavior. And if those people like Megyn Kelly and everything else refuse to acknowledge and accept that these people all have variables that are causing them to be the way that they are, and refuse to accept that as a reflection of who they are as human beings, well, then they are sick human beings in themselves, and they're not working to solve the problem. The way that you get to the solving the problem is everyone coming together and give and take, negotiate. It's not about my way or the highway, and that's how we operate. That's how those people operate, and that's where I differ from those people. And that's what me getting on my soapbox is really about. It's about acknowledging the fact that there are commonalities, similarities, and differences, and I aim to try and accept the differences and try to reach the common ground to get us closer to the common ground as a society. So that's what I'm on my soapbox about. So I am on my soapbox today, specifically what sparked all of this conversation is a rebuttal to Candice Owens' posts about feminism. because she is just as foul in condemning, because she condemns, and she is not a figurehead who's trying to come up with solutions to the problem. She's a figurehead who's only looking to point her finger and denigrate the opposition without trying to understand and have compassion for the variables that cause the opposition, or the variables that are the opposition, without having compassion for that and trying to come to a common ground of what needs to happen. And that's where I differ tremendously from Candice Owen. And that's what I'm gonna post about. Her feminist post, and this is a contrary to that. So y'all have a wonderful day. Be kind, do an act of kindness to somebody, for somebody. You know, I can tell you, life is a struggle. Everything is a struggle. Life is a struggle. I struggle and everything else. I struggle every day. I struggle to get through. I struggle to pay my bills. I struggle to work. I struggle just like everybody else. I know I'm just a poor nigga who puts my bootstraps on like everybody else and goes to work. But I do have an opinion. I am somewhat educated. And I think that I'm more moderate, and I think I'm more in line with what middle of the road people are, not necessarily the two extremists that are pulling people apart. I want to offer something different. So if you have something to say, please, I encourage any rebuttal. I encourage any contribution that can be said. I'm always learning. I'm always willing to learn. I'm always willing to understand the variables that are different from mine, and try to seek a commonality to work and adjust to those variables, and adjust to those opinions. I'm not saying I'm going to adopt your opinion. What I'm saying is I'm going to incorporate your opinion so that I would be less stringent about mine and understand the variables that can influence differences. So that's what I'm on my soapbox about. You guys have a wonderful day. Be kind. Do an act of kindness to people, all right? One love.